Thurgood Marshall, without a doubt, was one of the most significant, in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, transformational legal minds of the 20th century. Was tutored by a great mind and a great person, Charles Hamilton Houston. And it is my understanding that they started, in a sense, working on Brown versus Board of Education 20 years before that came to, 19 years before that became a reality. The legal foundation was laid in case after case after case, steady and steady and steady. Some people say they don't know when Thurgood Marshall slept, because when they got to his office, no matter how early he was there and no matter how late they left, he was still there. I heard him speak first at the Wheat Street Baptist Church, Atlanta, Georgia, in a civil rights rally. And he was introduced by the pastor of Wheat Street, who baptized my wife, Edwina. He was introduced that night as Mr. Civil Rights. And he talked really about the contradictions in the American system of justice, as well as the progress we had made and how far we had to go. One example he gave was a gentleman named Eugene Talmadge, who was at one time governor of Georgia, who said before he would allow a train to come to Georgia with blacks and whites sitting in the same car, he would turn the train around and send it back up the railroad. And Thurgood Marshall said, and just the other day, his son rode a train into Georgia, seated in a car with black people and white people sharing the same facility. I think the second time I heard him speak was on a Baptist convention in St. Louis, 1961. And the third time was during the Lyndon Johnson conference to fulfill these rights. That was an exciting time. I was listening to Thurgood and looking at Edwina because we were engaged to be married, and this was around.
Not necessarily in that order. I get it.
Yes. This must have been around April or May of 1966, and we were married in July. And that night, he gave a kind of overview of civil rights history and talked about what it was like to come onto the stage following Lyndon Johnson. The other thing I would say about him, and one of my friends of many years, Andy Young, been friend of our family for many years, says that all great leaders have a great sense of humor. And Thurgood Marshall certainly had a great sense of humor, even in serious and dangerous situations. That has been brought out in the more recent presentation of Thurgood Marshall when he was in the hospital and Nixon wanted to know what his condition was and asked for his hospital record. And the story goes that Thurgood Marshall said, yes, send them to them, but bring them to me first. which he simply wrote on the back of the envelope, "Not yet." Damon Keith has an interesting story in his autobiography when Thurgood Marshall was celebrating his 80th birthday, and they looked at the list and they said, well, there's some people who ought to be on this list, and they're not on there, and we're sure that this is an oversight. And Judge Keith called Vernon Judd, and Vernon Judd said, I'm not going to call him. You call him. And Judge Keith said, well, I'm not going to call him. I will call Wiley Branton, the late Wiley Branton. Wiley Branton said, well, I know where he is. I'll call him. And he did, and said, well, we've been looking at the list, and we think that probably some folk you have forgotten. He said, hell, it's my birthday. I know who I want there. Bam. And hung up the phone. It's amazing that he could go through the dangers, the toils, the snares that he went through, maintain his sanity and his brilliance, and in the language of our elders, keep on keeping on.
When the U.S. Supreme Court handed down the 1954 Brown decision mandating the desegregation of America's public schools, it was a major victory for civil rights attorney Thurgood Marshall. But no one, not even the justices, knew what would happen in the South.
I just know that many people were disappointed with the follow-up to the 54 decision, where the court entered the language of "with all deliberate speed," which seemed to have been winning the game with a 9-0 stroke, and then coming back and retarding the progress. And it's possible that that slowness gave the opposition time to mount what one, I think, Southern governor said would be a 50-year struggle against the implementation of Brown, and in that 50-year process, they would nullify it and interpose it. And to some extent, not to some extent, but to a large extent, that is what they were able to do. Not totally, but to a large degree. I understand that Daddy King had prayer with Governor Wallace. Jesse Jackson told me about an individual he met in Texas when he was campaigning for the nomination of the Democratic nomination of the presidency. And a gentleman in Texas came up and asked if he could have a photograph made with him. And Jesse Jackson had just finished speaking about Selma and the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And Jesse said, yes, you can have a photograph made with me. And he said to the gentleman who had requested the photograph, that was a great moment in Selma. And the gentleman said, yes, I was there. He said, that was really a great moment, wasn't it? He said, you don't know under what condition I was there. I was a member of the Klan. And Jesse paused for a moment, and he looked at Jesse with tears in his eyes and said, but this time, I want to be on the right side. Would you permit me this photograph to show to my children and grandchildren? You really want to know?
Yeah.
The Brooklyn Dodgers.
That's an easy one.
Yeah, you know, see Jackie Robinson hit that ball. This new era, this revolution, everybody I came in contact with in those young childhood days, everybody was a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, a Jackie Robinson fan. My civics teacher in the 8th grade brought her radio to school, to class, turned it on, and allowed us to listen to the World Series, and then interpreted the meaning of the desegregation of Major League Baseball. Now, that was not in the book,
Yeah.
but it was in life and in history. She was very, very creative.